From the studios of the Optimism Institute and home of the Blue Sky podcast comes this month's edition of A Bit of Blue Sky, the mini podcast with maximum optimism. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and every month we'll present these shorter versions of our flagship show covering a wide range of subjects in a fun-sized format, while always keeping our eyes on the notion that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. Greetings all. Welcome to this month's edition of A Bit of Blue Sky. This time around, we're going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and that is books. Yes, books. I have a list of books I'm going to talk about briefly that will help you maintain that New Year's resolution that you made to be more optimistic in 2025. I'm sure you all did that. Maybe some of you have lapsed. We're well past Quitters Friday or whatever they call that date. I think it's the first or second Friday in January. We're now into February, and guess what? If you've lapsed, I won't tell anyone. But if you want to get back on the beam, these are some books you might read to help you think differently about the world, think better about the world. And then I'll mention one, too, that might give you practice that could assist with those things as well. So today's Bit of Blue Sky, we are going to talk about all things books. Okay, first up, batting leadoff. The book is Factfulness by Hans Rosling. Full title is Factfulness, 10 Reasons Why We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. That's really what this book is about. Hans Rosling he's passed away. He was a remarkable man. This book was written in 2018. If you don't have time to read the book, there's also a TED Talk that he's given, lots of videos you can find online. But basically, he challenges the views that so many of us have. And he starts with a quiz, actually, in the book, where he asks you to, what percent of the world is living in poverty? A lot of questions that people get wrong on the negative side. They think things are much worse than they really are. That's one of the places he starts. But then he builds a whole bunch of cases for all the progress we've made in the world, how much the world continues to improve in general, and then in specific ways like healthcare, longevity, those sorts of things. There's a bunch of graphs and charts to back up what he has. And he writes with a really positive, infectiously upbeat style. I think you'll really like Factfulness. And if there's one book you want to read that'll make you feel better about the world and help you be more optimistic this year, it would be Factfulness by Hans Rosling. Next up is a book by one of our favorite guests on Blue Sky, Steven Pinker. It's a book he wrote in 2019. It's called Enlightenment Now. He talks in this book about so many of the values that we take for granted these days, but that we truly appreciate when we think about them, were actually formed during the European Enlightenment. And he talks about things like democracy and science and tolerance and all these things that have evolved significantly in the time since the Enlightenment, and frankly didn't evolve much at all before the Enlightenment. He talks about how the world was filled with so much more war back then than we are today. And it's a really thoughtful book. He's a brilliant guy who also manages to write in a way that people like me can understand and access. And he's also written a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature that's about how much less violent the world is today, fewer wars and terrible violent crime than there were for most of human history. But of all his books, I think Enlightenment Now is one you should read if you want to feel better about the world in 2025. It's by Steven Pinker. It was published in 2019, so check that one out. Next up is a book I really enjoyed called Humankind. It's by Rutger Bregman. It came out in 2021. Big bestseller, deservedly so, also very well written, very uplifting. What he does is he basically says then the title Humankind is sort of a play on the word humankind and also that humans are actually kind. And he refutes this notion that so many of us have that left to our own devices, humans are evil, humans fight, humans are violent. And he disabuses a lot of these notions with incredible examples and interesting looks at history, even literature. One of my favorites that people remember when they read this book, I think, is about Lord of the Flies. If you read the book in school, it's fiction. These kids get shipwrecked and then they break into these camps and then it becomes violent and nasty and awful. And it was a work of fiction, and people just sort of took that as science, that if that's what would happen if a bunch of kids got washed up on a deserted island. Well, Rutger Bregman digs up the story of a group of kids where it actually happened to them. And just the opposite happened when they were shipwrecked. They all cooperated. They made things happen in a positive way. Eventually, they were rescued. But that's just one example. He goes through a bunch of them that really shows that the history of humanity is one of cooperation, of kindness. It's very uplifting. He's a really smart guy, and I really think you want to read that one. It's called Humankind by Rutger Bregman. I imagine you might be wondering, gee, Bill, if Rutger Bregman's such a good guy and that book is so great, why haven't you had him on the Blue Sky podcast? Well, I asked. I was turned down. They said he's working on a new book. I can't wait to see what that is. I hope it's true. But I'd love to have him on anytime he's available. Next up, on favorite books that I have that will help you stay optimistic in 2025 actually goes all the way back to 2010. And he was a guest on the Blue Sky podcast, this author. It's Matt Ridley. The book is The Rational Optimist. We talked a lot about it on that podcast episode of Blue Sky. You ought to listen to that again if you haven't already. Let's do it again if you have already, and listen to it for the first time if you haven't. Matt Ridley's a really fascinating guy. He also talks about the cooperative nature of human beings, about how free trade across cultures, across communities helped grow the world, all the fascinating ways we're interconnected as species, and all the ways we continue to improve, and all the reasons why we should maintain a sense of optimism, or as he would describe it, a sense of rational optimism, because it's based on true facts and rational beliefs, not some far-off ideals that just aren't true. So, The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley, Blue Sky guest, definitely one you might want to read on your path towards being more optimistic. And last but certainly not least on my list of books to read is one that's more about personal practice that you might want to try out, and less about reading about reasons why we should be optimistic. This one is The Power of a Few Kind Words, written by Blue Sky guest Tracy Gates in 2023. It's a lovely book, and she was inspired after the passing of her father, who used to on Christmas and birthdays say, when asked what he wanted, was just a few kind words. And Tracy realized how important a few kind words could be and took it upon herself for an entire year, once every day, to handwrite a letter of appreciation to someone. It could be a dear friend, it could be family, it could be someone that she had just met, for example, in jury duty is one of the more memorable stories. It's a lovely book. It's a really interesting practice that no doubt would make you feel better about the world. Every day for a year is pretty ambitious, but just thinking more in general about expressing appreciation for people in a few kind words. And if you can spare the time, and try to spare the time, to sit down and handwrite a letter, put it in the old-fashioned mail, it's generally that much more appreciated and special. So The Power of a Few Kind Words by Tracy Gates, 2023, a great book to check out in your quest to be more optimistic in 2025. So when it comes to books, I could go on and on, but we're going to cap it at 5 books for this episode of A Bit of Blue Sky. Hope you enjoyed learning more about them. You may have read some of them yourself. If so, let us know what you thought of them. If you agree with me or have a different point of view, we can be reached most effectively at info@theoptimisminstitute.com. Also, let us know if there are other books you think should be on this list that we haven't mentioned. Every one that I talked about today, every book that I talked about, is available on the Blue Sky bookshelf. So check that out at our website, theoptimisminstitute.com. And I hope you enjoy these books, and I hope they help you in your quest to be more optimistic. So thank you for joining me today on A Bit of Blue Sky. This and all episodes of Blue Sky are made possible by the great people at Sound On Studios. Check them out at soundonstudios.com. They are our editors and mixers, and all graphics for both the Blue Sky podcast and the Optimism Institute are created by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K. You can check them out at crushgraphics.com. Again, I'm Bill Burke. I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky and A Bit of Blue Sky. And I thank you for listening. See you next time.